told you after you catfished me, man. You know, we cool, whatever, but we can't do all that no more.
It happens sometimes.
Dude, chicken strangers. Mellow Jello. What you got popping over there, Reptar?
I just came back from the store. You know what I'm saying?
Ooh, what were you trying to get? Some shaving cream?
I was playing the lottery ticket and I won $50.
Oh, okay. That ain't the only thing you should have been trying to scratch off.
Straight like that, you know what I'm saying?
So what you do with that $50? You been trying to get no Gillette razor in there?
I bought the kids something, bought my God kids something. So
Excuse me, say what?
Here's all the stuff I bought.
Oh, okay. Show me what you're working with. Hit.
So this is what I bought. You know what I'm saying? I got M&M, Taiki. What is it? How you say, y'all? Taiki.
Listen to the baby. She got you.
Yeah, this next stuff. The girls like these. Got me some chips. You know what I'm saying? Got Fados.
Fado.
Pop.
You said it right at first, Fagos. I mean, Fado.
Oh, okay. You must have got all that from the Mexican stuff.
Where's my M&M?
Look down like you're looking at your chin hand.
Oh, okay. The M&M, my sneaker, you know, Reese's Cup. You know what I'm saying? This mine's yours. This is my Twitch, you know what I'm saying? With all this stuff I bought you.
Okay, I see. You don't want to get no fruits, vegetables, salad, layer, nothing?
They got McDonald's, Pop. Yeah, bought us something to eat.
Oh, okay. You good then.
Of course, I bought my sister some cigarette. Here you go, sister.
Oh, that was nice. Why you just get a one, though?
Down up.
Mellow Sharp. Where the hell you at, girl? Now, you know you banned from up there from last time you went up there and got mad because they didn't have no chicken strangers. Don't go in there acting no fool asking no stupid questions.
I heard the Pokemon was in here.
The what?
The Pokemon.
I have no idea.
You don't know the Pokemon is?
Yeah, I don't know if it's in here or not.
Somebody said it was in here.
Oh my God, shut your ass.
I'm gonna go look.
I don't care what none of them say, because you know what you is. Let me hear you say it, girl. You my what?
What the hell?
Yo.
What are you doing?
Nothing. On YouTube, looking at butt.
Are you all alone?
Hey, man, that's what I be saying, man. I don't be liking when you be getting high, man. Be getting on that funny shit. Ain't no Netflix and chill over here. Yo, hold on, Gayness. This is Baby on the other line. What's up, bro? Think about you. Hey, hold on real quick, though. Yo, I'm gonna hit you back, man.
Who's that?
Mind your business. So what's up?
Big old ass.
You know, don't make me slide through. That's a ram rap.
Ella, what's happening? What's up?
What's up?
But chill, bro.
I'm a hater maker. What? I'm a hater maker. What? I'm a hater maker. What? I'm a hater maker. Hey, see you hating on me, bitch. I'm a hater maker. Oh, for real, nigga. I do that motherfucker, bro. Yo, I do. Nigga, on that pipe, nigga, you know me, my nigga. Squad!
corner.
I'm flat. They racist. They don't fuck with niggas. Die left down. Not die left. Ha. Ha. My name left down. Females need to stop lying talking about y'all selfies be off guard. Y'all be posing. Come on now. You might not have been looking at the camera, but that wasn't off guard. You was posing, you was ready.
Ladies, why would dudes be on the phone, right? Like if y'all like in the living room and we like in the kitchen or the back room or something like that, why when we finally look over at y'all be staring at us like this?
Your mom said you got 5 seconds to take them clothes off and put them in the basket. She's coming in there with that belt.
Oh man. Somebody come get her, she's dancing like a stripper. Somebody come tip her, she's dancing like a stripper. Hey, what you talking about, man? You ate it? You gotta take the airplane. That ain't even how airplane sound, but daddy trying though. Shit. Say bye-bye. Say bye-bye. Come on with the next person now. Y'all know P-Money got places to be. What in the...
Thank you for choosing McDonald's. How may I help you?
Yeah, can I get 2 sausage biscuit hash browns?
Anything else for you today?
That's it.
Okay, so it's going to be $3.25 extra first one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Feel like a sack of quarters with that beaver fur jacket on. Whoa! Was that a bark? Did she say woof? Boy, you fuck with her, you get lunch and breakfast. She got a quarter pounder in the front, 2 little sausage biscuits in the back.
She got a quarter pound in the front and 2 little sausage biscuits in the back.
You better get them Avon boots off that bed.
A-bomb boots.
Go and grab that chair and show me how you'll give a lap dance in them maternity tights. I bet that chair smell like zoo wind and mechanic nuts. No,
I bet that
you
chair
just
smell
go
like
drop
zoo
your
wind
ass
and
on up out of
mechanic
here. You
nuts.
in them Toy Story boots.
God damn. Damn.
I can't stand. What's up? Why you won't smile and take the picture for me, little man? You can't eat those cookies over there. Those are for Santa. Alright, I'm gonna tell your mama big nasty on you. Okay, you keep on. Santa gonna move you to the naughty list. Okay, fine. We can sit here all day. All right, listen. You take one good picture and you can have some cookies, okay? Hey, I don't like that attitude, mister. Okay, you know what? I'm leaving your grown, possessed, psychotic ass here. Call your motherfucking mama, man.
That's pretty badass. That went, yeah.